I think I didn't do anything wrong, just brought some old friends together for a party. But now, after my husband handed me divorce papers in front of everyone, people are looking at me like I'm the villain. I still believe I was just trying to have a little fun and maybe teach him a lesson. Let me start from the beginning so you can understand what really happened. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. It was supposed to be a simple Saturday afternoon barbecue. Malcolm had been so distant lately, buried in his work files and barely acknowledging me when I walked into a room. Our 7-year-old daughter Sophie was spending more time asking me why Daddy seemed sad than playing with her toys. I felt like I was becoming invisible in my own home. That's when I got the brilliant idea to invite some old friends over, including Evan Lark, my ex-boyfriend from college. We'd reconnected on social media a few months back, just innocent catching up, you know? He was charming as ever. Still had that boyish grin that used to make my heart skip. I figured having him around might remind Malcolm what he had, maybe spark a little healthy jealousy. I sent out a group text to everyone except Malcolm. Backyard BBQ this Saturday, come hungry and ready to party. I included Evan's number without really thinking about it. It wasn't malicious, I just wanted to surprise everyone. Saturday arrived with perfect weather. Malcolm fired up the grill while I set up the backyard with string lights and citronella candles. Sophie helped arrange the lawn chairs, chattering excitedly about seeing her aunts and uncles. My sister Heather arrived first with her husband Paul, followed by Malcolm's mother Margaret, who immediately started rearranging my appetizer table without asking. "Aurelia, dear," Margaret said in that tone she reserved for criticizing my housekeeping. "Perhaps we should have more substantial food for the adults." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. My heart fluttered. I knew it was Evan. I practically skipped to the front door, smoothing my sundress and checking my reflection in the hallway mirror. "Evan!" I threw my arms around him like we were old friends reuniting. He looked amazing, still tall and lean, wearing a fitted polo that showed off his arms. "I'm so glad you could make it." Malcolm's voice came from behind me, flat and confused. "Aurelia, who's this?" I turned, beaming. "Malcolm, this is Evan Lark. We went to college together. Evan, meet my husband Malcolm." The look on Malcolm's face was priceless. Total shock, mixed with something I couldn't quite read. Evan stepped forward with an easy smile, extending his hand. "Great to meet you, man. Aurelia's told me so much about you." That wasn't exactly true, but it sounded good. Malcolm shook Evan's hand stiffly. "Funny, she hasn't mentioned you at all." I laughed, swatting Malcolm's arm. "Don't be silly. Come on, let's get you a drink, Evan. I made sangria." The afternoon progressed with an undercurrent of tension I found thrilling. Evan was the perfect guest, complimenting my cooking, playing catch with Sophie, charming everyone with stories from his marketing job. I caught Malcolm watching us several times, his jaw tight as he flipped burgers with unnecessary force. Heather pulled me aside while refilling her wine glass. "Girl, who is that gorgeous man, and why didn't you tell me you had such attractive friends?" "Just an old college buddy," I said, but I couldn't hide my smile. It's nice having someone appreciate good conversation for once. Margaret, however, was less impressed. She cornered me by the dessert table, her voice low and sharp. "Aurelia, I don't know what game you're playing, but that man is looking at you like you're not married. You're being dramatic, Margaret. We're all adults here. Adults don't invite strange men to family gatherings without telling their spouses." I was about to respond when Sophie ran up to us, tugging on my dress. "Mommy, Evan looks like me. See?" She pointed to his dark hair and brown eyes. "We match." The words tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop them, loud enough for the whole party to hear. "You're right, sweetheart. Evan does have the same beautiful features as you. Isn't that funny how genetics work?" The backyard fell silent except for the sizzling grill. Malcolm dropped his spatula. Margaret's face went white. Even Evan looked uncomfortable, suddenly very interested in his drink. I laughed, trying to recover. It's just a coincidence. People always say Sophie looks like me, and Evan and I we have similar coloring. But the damage was done. Malcolm walked over to the grill, turned off the gas, and announced to everyone, "Party's over. Thanks for coming." "Malcolm, don't be ridiculous." "I said party's over, Aurelia." His voice was quiet but firm in a way I'd never heard before. "Everyone needs to leave. Now." Guests started gathering their things in awkward silence. Heather squeezed my hand supportively, while Paul avoided eye contact. Margaret kissed Sophie goodbye but didn't acknowledge me. Evan slipped me his business card as he left, whispering, "Call me if you need anything." After everyone left, Malcolm disappeared into his study and locked the door. I knocked for an hour, alternating between apologies and accusations of him ruining our party, but he never responded. He didn't come to bed that night, and when I woke up the next morning, he was already gone for work. I had no idea that would be the beginning of the end. Monday morning at the insurance office felt like a refuge. My coworkers were always up for gossip, and I needed someone to validate that Malcolm had completely overreacted to an innocent party. "You should have seen him," I told my cubicle neighbor Janet, while we waited for our computers to boot up. "Acting like I committed some crime by inviting an old friend over. Men are so insecure." Janet raised an eyebrow. "Was this friend attractive?" Objectively speaking, yes, but that's not the point. I'm married, not dead. I can have male friends. By lunch, I'd shared the story with half the office, carefully framing Malcolm as the jealous, controlling husband who couldn't handle his wife having a social life. Most of my female coworkers were sympathetic, sharing their own stories of unreasonable spouses. But not everyone was on my side. Linda Chen from accounting pulled me aside during my afternoon break. "Aurelia, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but people are starting to talk." "Talk about what?" "About you and this Evan guy. Some people are saying you two have been seen around town together, and with the way you talked about him today." She looked genuinely concerned. "I just think you should be careful. Office gossip has a way of getting back to spouses." I felt my cheeks burn. "That's ridiculous. We've had coffee once, maybe twice. As friends. If people want to make something out of nothing, that's their problem." But Linda's warning stuck with me. When I got home that evening, Malcolm was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with Sophie, helping her with homework. He looked up when I entered, but didn't smile. "How was work?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Fine, busy day." I started pulling ingredients from the refrigerator for dinner. "How about you?" "Interesting. Got a call from Dave Morrison today. He mentioned seeing you at Cafe Luna last week. Said you seemed to be having an intense conversation with some guy he didn't recognize." My hand stilled on the vegetable drawer. Dave was Malcolm's college roommate and one of his closest friends. Of course he'd report back. "It was just coffee, Malcolm, with Evan. We were catching up." "Catching up on what, exactly? You hadn't mentioned him in 15 years of marriage until Saturday." I turned to face him, putting on my most reasonable voice. "If you made me feel special, I wouldn't need attention elsewhere. When's the last time you complimented me? Took me out? Made me feel like a woman instead of just Sophie's mother and your housekeeper?" Malcolm's face went carefully blank. "So, this is my fault." "I'm not saying it's anyone's fault. I'm saying that maybe if you paid half as much attention to your wife as you do to those work files, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Sophie looked up from her math worksheet, sensing the tension. "Are you guys fighting?" "No, sweetheart," Malcolm said gently, stroking her hair. "Mommy and Daddy are just talking. Why don't you finish your homework in your room? I'll check it before bedtime." After Sophie left, Malcolm leaned back in his chair, studying me. Aurelia, I need you to be honest with me. Is there something going on between you and Evan? Of course not. God, Malcolm, you're being paranoid. We're friends. That's it. I can't believe you're making such a big deal out of this. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. There was definitely chemistry between Evan and me, an electric feeling I hadn't experienced in years. We'd been texting regularly since reconnecting, sharing inside jokes and memories from college. Nothing physical had happened, but the emotional connection was undeniable. Malcolm stood up from the table. I'm going to stay in the guest room tonight. I think we both need some space to think. You're being ridiculous. Maybe, but I'd rather be ridiculous than naive. That night, I heard him moving around the guest room, opening and closing drawers. When I got up for water around midnight, I noticed his laptop was gone from his study, along with several manila folders that were usually stacked on his desk. Something cold settled in my stomach, but I pushed it away. Malcolm was just being dramatic. He'd get over it. I couldn't stop thinking about Evan, the way he'd looked at me during the party, how he'd slipped me his business card, the gentle concern in his voice when he said to call if I needed anything. Malcolm's coldness was driving me crazy, and I found myself reaching for my phone more and more often. I could use a friend right now, I texted Evan Wednesday morning. Coffee later? His response came within minutes. Rough week? Cafe Luna at 2? I spent extra time on my appearance that afternoon, choosing a fitted blouse that brought out my eyes and applying makeup with more care than I'd used in months. I told myself I was just trying to feel better about myself, but deep down I knew I wanted Evan to notice. He was already waiting when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. He stood to greet me with a warm hug that lasted just a beat too long. You look beautiful, Aurelia. How are you holding up? The concern in his voice nearly made me cry. When was the last time Malcolm had asked how I was holding up? It's been difficult, I admitted, sliding into the chair across from him. Malcolm's been so cold since the party. I think he's jealous of our friendship. Evan leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. He should be threatened. You're an amazing woman, and if he can't see that, it's his loss. For the next hour, I poured out my frustrations, how invisible I felt in my marriage, how Malcolm had become distant and critical, how I missed feeling desired and appreciated. Evan listened intently, occasionally reaching across to touch my hand when I got emotional. You deserve so much better than this, he said softly. I remember how vibrant you were in college, how everyone was drawn to your energy. You still have that spark, but it's like he's trying to dim it. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed together, I found myself saying, if I hadn't been so eager to settle down and be practical. Evan's fingers intertwined with mine across the table. We were good together, weren't we? We understood each other. The moment felt charged with possibility. I could feel myself leaning closer, drawn by his familiar cologne and the way he was looking at me like I was the most fascinating woman in the world. But then my phone buzzed with a text from Sophie's school about pickup time, and reality crashed back in. I pulled my hand away, suddenly aware of my wedding ring. I should go, I said, though I didn't want to. Of course. But Aurelia? He caught my hand again as I stood. I'm here if you need me, for anything. I floated home on a cloud of validation and possibility. For the first time in months, I felt attractive and interesting. Someone appreciated me for who I was, not just what I could do for them. That evening, Malcolm was waiting in the kitchen when I walked in from picking up Sophie. How was your afternoon? He asked, but something in his tone made me wary. Fine, just ran some errands. Errands at Cafe Luna? My heart stopped. How did you... Dave's wife Sarah saw you there. Said you looked pretty cozy with the same guy from last week. Malcolm's voice was steady, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. She took a picture, Aurelia. Sent it to Dave because she thought it was strange. He showed me his phone screen. There I was, leaning across the table toward Evan, our hands clearly touching, both of us gazing at each other with unmistakable intimacy. "It's not what it looks like," I said automatically. "What does it look like, Aurelia? Because to me it looks like my wife is having an affair. We're friends. I was upset about our fight, and I needed someone to talk to. Someone who actually listens to me instead of making me feel like everything is my fault. So this is about me again. Maybe it is. Maybe if you made an effort to connect with your wife instead of treating her like a roommate, she wouldn't need to find emotional support elsewhere." Malcolm stared at me for a long moment. Emotional support? Is that what we're calling it? Before I could respond, the front door opened, and Margaret walked in without knocking, as she always did. She took one look at our faces and stopped short. "Oh, I'm interrupting something." "Actually, Mom, your timing is perfect," Malcolm said. "Aurelia was just explaining why she's been meeting with her ex-boyfriend behind my back." Margaret's eyes went ice cold as she looked at me. "Excuse me?" "It's not like that," I protested. "We're friends. I'm allowed to have friends." "Friends don't meet in secret," Margaret said sharply. "Friends don't lie to their spouses, and friends certainly don't hold hands in public while their husband is home taking care of their child. You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about, young lady. I've been married for 40 years, and I know the difference between friendship and betrayal." Malcolm held up a hand. "Mom, please. This is between Aurelia and me." But Margaret wasn't finished. "That man at the party, the way he looked at Sophie, the comment you made about genetics. Are you out of your mind? That was a joke. It was inappropriate and humiliating. And now I find out you've been sneaking around with him? What kind of mother are you?" "Don't you dare question my parenting," I snapped. "I'm a good mother." "Good mothers don't put their children in the middle of their midlife crises," Margaret shot back. Malcolm stepped between us. "That's enough. Mom, I appreciate your concern, but you should go. Aurelia and I need to work this out ourselves." After Margaret left, the house felt suffocating. Malcolm had retreated to his study again, and Sophie was unusually quiet during dinner, picking at her food and watching both of us with worried eyes. That night, I lay in our empty bed staring at the ceiling, Evan's words echoing in my head. "You deserve so much better than this." Maybe he was right. Maybe I did. The tension in our house had become unbearable. Malcolm barely spoke to me except when necessary, and Sophie had started having nightmares. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, constantly defensive and increasingly resentful of Malcolm's silent treatment. So when Margaret invited us for Sunday dinner, a weekly tradition I'd grown to dread even before our current crisis, I decided I wasn't going to tiptoe around everyone's feelings anymore. If they wanted to treat me like the villain, fine. But I wasn't going to be quiet about Malcolm's faults either. The whole family was there. Margaret and her husband Robert, Malcolm's brother James with his wife Kelly, and their teenage twins. Everyone was making polite conversation, but I could feel the undercurrent of judgment, especially from Margaret, who barely acknowledged my presence. "So, Malcolm," James said, cutting into his roast beef, "how's the new project at work going?" "Good. Busy, but good." Malcolm's responses were clipped, professional. He'd barely looked at me since we arrived. "That's our Malcolm," I said brightly, taking a large sip of wine. "Always buried in work. Sometimes I think he loves those spreadsheets more than his family." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Margaret's fork clinked against her plate. "I'm sure Malcolm works hard to provide for his family," Kelly said diplomatically. "Oh, he provides all right. Financial support anyway. Emotional support is a different story." I could hear the edge in my own voice, but the wine was making me bold. "When's the last time you asked how I'm doing, Malcolm? When's the last time you made me feel like a priority?" Malcolm set down his fork. "Aurelia, maybe we should discuss this at home." "Why? These are family. They should know what their precious Malcolm is really like as a husband. Margaret's face was flushed with anger. Aurelia, that's quite enough. Is it? Because I've been listening to subtle criticisms and judgment for weeks now, and I'm tired of being the only one who's not allowed to speak their mind. Sophie, who had been quietly coloring at the kids' table, looked up with frightened eyes. Mommy, why are you yelling? I'm not yelling, sweetheart. I'm just having a conversation with the adults. But Malcolm was already standing, moving toward Sophie. Come on, princess. Let's go look at Grandma's garden. She's fine where she is, I said sharply. Stop treating me like I'm some kind of threat to my own daughter. You're embarrassing yourself, Margaret said coldly. And more importantly, you're upsetting that little girl. I'm embarrassing myself? What about Malcolm embarrassing me by acting like I've committed some crime? What about you embarrassing me by treating me like a stranger in your home? James cleared his throat. Maybe we should all take a step back. No, let's not take a step back. Let's talk about how Malcolm has become so paranoid and controlling that he can't handle his wife having a single friend. Let's talk about how he's turned this entire family against me because his ego can't handle that someone else finds me interesting. Malcolm had returned to the table, his face carefully composed, but his hands shaking slightly as he helped Sophie back to her seat. Is that what you think is happening here? He asked quietly. I think you're punishing me for making you feel insecure. I think you're playing the victim because it's easier than admitting you've been a neglectful husband. Neglectful, Malcolm repeated, as if tasting the word. I work 50 hours a week to support our family. I coach Sophie's soccer team. I do the grocery shopping because you hate it. I handle all the bills and maintenance and... Those are chores, Malcolm. When's the last time you romanced me? When's the last time you made me feel beautiful or desired or special? When's the last time you gave me a reason to? The words hung in the air like a slap. Even I was stunned into silence for a moment. Margaret nodded approvingly. Finally, someone said it. Mom, Malcolm warned, but I was already on my feet, fury coursing through me. So there it is, your true feelings. I'm not worth romance or affection unless I earn it somehow. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. And you know what? At least Evan appreciates me for who I am, not for what I can do for him. The admission slipped out before I could stop it. The room went dead silent. Malcolm's face went white. Get out. What? Get out of my mother's house. Get out of my sight. Sophie, come with Daddy. You can't take her. Watch me. Malcolm scooped up our daughter, who was now crying. James, can you drive them home? I'm taking Sophie to stay with you tonight. Malcolm, you're being ridiculous. But he was already walking toward the door, carrying our sobbing daughter. We're done, Aurelia. Whatever this was, we're done. I stood there in Margaret's dining room, surrounded by his family's disgusted faces, wine-drunk and humiliated, finally understanding that I had pushed too far. But even then, I told myself it was his fault for making me feel so desperate in the first place. I woke up Monday morning with a crushing hangover and an empty house. Malcolm had left early for work without a word, and Sophie was still at James and Kelly's. The silence felt ominous. My phone had been buzzing all morning with texts from Heather, who'd heard about the dinner disaster from Paul, who'd gotten it secondhand from James. Come over, her latest message read. You need coffee and sister time. I was grateful for the escape. Heather's house always felt warm and welcoming, the opposite of the Arctic atmosphere at home. She had coffee ready and pulled me into a hug the moment I walked in. Honey, what happened? Paul said Malcolm left with Sophie and hasn't been back. I collapsed onto her couch and told her everything, the dinner, Malcolm's cold reaction, how alone I felt. Heather listened with appropriate outrage, refilling my coffee and making sympathetic noises. He's being completely unreasonable, she said firmly. So what if you have a friend? So what if that friend happens to be attractive and male? You're not dead, you're married. That's what I keep trying to tell him, but he's acting like I'm having some torrid affair. Are you? Heather asked with a sly smile. Because honestly, from what you've described, this Evan sounds pretty amazing. Maybe Malcolm's reaction is telling you something about your marriage. Before I could respond, there was a sharp knock at the front door. Heather frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. The man at the door was tall, official-looking, carrying a manila envelope. Aurelia Fenwick? Yes? You've been served. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Divorce papers, petition for legal separation, motion for temporary custody of Sophie Fenwick. The words swam before my eyes. Oh my God, Heather breathed, reading over my shoulder. He actually did it. I sank back onto the couch, the papers scattered around me. He can't be serious. This is just him trying to scare me. But as I read through the documents, it became clear that Malcolm was very serious indeed. He was citing irreconcilable differences, seeking primary custody of Sophie, and requesting division of all marital assets. There were dates, times, specific incidents mentioned. He'd been documenting everything. My phone rang. Mom. Aurelia? I just got the strangest call from Malcolm. He said he was letting me know that you two were separating and that Sophie would be staying with him for now. What is going on? He's lost his mind, Mom. He served me with divorce papers because I had coffee with an old friend. Coffee with an old friend? Mom's voice was sharp. Is that really all it was? Of course. God, why does everyone think I'm some kind of adulteress? But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. My relationship with Evan had crossed emotional lines, even if we hadn't been physical. The texting, the secret meetings, the way I'd been confiding in him instead of working on my marriage. Maybe it wasn't technically cheating, but it wasn't innocent either. I'm coming over, Mom said. I'm at Heather's. Then I'm coming there. 20 minutes later, Mom arrived looking worried and tired. She hugged me, but I could feel her tension. Tell me everything, she said. From the beginning. So I did, with Heather occasionally jumping in with supportive comments. But as I told the story, I could see Mom's expression growing more troubled. Aurelia, she said when I finished, you invited your ex-boyfriend to a family party without telling your husband? He's not really an ex-boyfriend. We dated briefly in college. And you've been meeting with him secretly? Not secretly. We had coffee, a few times. Without telling Malcolm. I don't have to report every conversation I have. Mom sighed deeply. Honey, I love you, but you have to see how this looks. From the outside, it looks like you were having an emotional affair. Whose side are you on? I snapped. I'm on your side. That's why I'm telling you the truth. If you want to save your marriage, you need to take responsibility for your part in this. But I wasn't ready to hear that. I was still too angry, too hurt, too convinced that everyone was overreacting. That evening, I returned to an empty house. Malcolm had been there. I could tell because more of his clothes were missing and his laptop was gone from the kitchen counter where he usually worked. There was a note on the refrigerator in his careful handwriting. Sophie is staying with James and Kelly until we figure out custody arrangements. My lawyer will be in touch about scheduling a time to discuss division of assets. Please don't contact me directly unless it's an emergency involving Sophie. The formality of it hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't Malcolm being dramatic or trying to punish me. This was Malcolm protecting himself and our daughter from what he saw as a threat. For the first time since this whole thing started, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, I had made a terrible mistake. 3 months later, I sat in the county courthouse wearing my best suit, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Wells, had been brutally honest about my chances. The evidence is damaging, Aurelia. The recordings from the family dinner, the photos from the cafe, the text messages. It all paints a picture of someone who was emotionally checked out of her marriage and pursuing another relationship. But I never physically cheated, I protested for the 100th time. Emotional infidelity can be just as damaging in custody proceedings. combined with your behavior at family gatherings and the public humiliation of your husband, the judge is likely to view Malcolm as the more stable parent. Across the courtroom, Malcolm sat with his lawyer, looking composed and professional. He'd lost weight over the past few months, and there were new lines around his eyes, but he seemed determined. Margaret sat behind him in the gallery, along with James and Kelly. On my side, Mom sat alone. Heather had claimed she couldn't get time off work, though I suspected she was just uncomfortable with how everything had played out. The proceedings were a nightmare. Malcolm's lawyer methodically presented evidence, photos of Evan and me at the cafe, screenshots of our text conversations, which Malcolm had somehow obtained from my phone, audio recordings from the disastrous family dinner where I'd berated Malcolm in front of everyone, including Sophie. "Mrs. Fenwick," Malcolm's lawyer said during cross-examination, "you invited your former romantic partner to a family gathering without informing your husband, correct?" "He wasn't really a romantic partner. You dated him in college, did you not?" "Briefly, yes, but—" "And you began communicating with him regularly without your husband's knowledge?" "I don't need permission to have friends." "Friends don't typically meet in secret, do they? Friends don't hold hands across cafe tables? Friends don't text each other late at night with complaints about their spouses?" Each question felt like a trap. Every answer I gave seemed to make me look worse. When it was my turn to testify, I tried to explain my side. How lonely I'd felt, how Malcolm had become distant, how I'd just been seeking emotional support from an old friend. But under cross-examination, my justifications sounded hollow even to me. "Mrs. Fenwick, in the recorded conversation from your mother-in-law's dinner table, you stated, and I quote, 'At least Evan appreciates me for who I am.' You said this in front of your 7-year-old daughter. Do you believe this was appropriate?" My cheeks burned. I was upset. People say things when they're upset. "You also made a comment at the backyard party about your daughter resembling Mr. Lark. Several witnesses have testified to this. What did you mean by that comment?" "It was just an observation. They both have dark hair." "Mrs. Fenwick, are you suggesting that your daughter's paternity is in question?" "No, of course not. It was just a stupid comment." But I could see the judge's expression, and I knew how it looked. The worst part was when they called Sophie to speak with the judge privately. She was so small walking into that big courtroom, holding the bailiff's hand. When she came out 20 minutes later, she wouldn't look at me. Mom took the stand on my behalf, but even her testimony was lukewarm. She talked about how I was a loving mother, but when pressed about my recent behavior, she admitted she was concerned about Aurelia's judgment and thought I needed time to reflect on my priorities. Margaret's testimony was devastating. She spoke about my disrespect for the family, my inappropriate behavior at gatherings, and her concerns about my influence on Sophie. When asked about the backyard party, she said, "It was clear to everyone present that Mrs. Fenwick was more interested in impressing her male friend than in her husband or daughter's comfort." James and Kelly testified about the dinner incident, describing how upset Sophie had been and how they'd had to comfort her that night when she kept asking why Mommy and Daddy were fighting. Even Paul, Heather's husband, testified for Malcolm, saying he'd been uncomfortable with my behavior and had warned Heather that I seemed to be heading down a dangerous path. The judge's decision was swift and decisive. Malcolm was awarded primary custody of Sophie, with me getting supervised visitation every other weekend until I completed counseling. The house would be sold, with Malcolm getting 60% of the proceeds due to his greater financial contribution and custody arrangement. My retirement accounts were split, but Malcolm kept the majority of our savings. "Mrs. Fenwick," the judge said, looking at me directly, "while I don't doubt your love for your daughter, your recent actions demonstrate a concerning lack of judgment and consideration for your family's well-being. Children need stability and parents who prioritize their needs above their own emotional desires." I sat there stunned as the gavel came down, officially ending my marriage and drastically limiting my access to my daughter. Malcolm didn't look triumphant. He looked tired and sad. But he also looked relieved. As people filed out of the courtroom, I caught a glimpse of Sophie in the hallway. She was holding Malcolm's hand, wearing the blue dress I'd bought her for the first day of school. When she saw me, she gave a small wave, but she didn't run to me like she used to. Mom drove me home. To what used to be home. The house felt enormous and empty, full of the ghosts of the family I'd destroyed through my own selfishness and poor choices. That evening, alone in the house that would soon belong to someone else, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge the truth I'd been avoiding for months. I hadn't been the victim of Malcolm's jealousy or his family's judgment. I had been a wife and mother who'd prioritized her own emotional needs over her family's stability. I had pursued validation from another man instead of working on my marriage. I had humiliated my husband publicly and put my daughter in the middle of adult conflicts. I had been, in every way that mattered, the villain of my own story. The realization came too late to save my marriage, but maybe, with time and genuine change, it wasn't too late to rebuild a relationship with my daughter and find some kind of redemption. But that would be a much longer, much harder story than the one I'd been telling myself about being misunderstood and unappreciated. For now, I was exactly where my choices had led me. Alone with the consequences of my actions, finally ready to take responsibility for the pain I'd caused the people I claimed to love most. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching,